Kickstarter's influence on tabletop gaming has been enormous. Since 2009, they've been bringing games to life, starting with a game that raised $1,000 to now one that raised $15 million, and many, many more campaigns in between. Tens of thousands of successful games launched, millions of people backed, and billions of dollars raised. There's a reason why Time magazine has named it one of the top 100 most influential companies. But over the past few years, two new crowdfunding platforms have entered the ring, Gamefound and BackerKit. And combined, they've raised over $230 million with their tabletop campaigns. When zooming in on the last year alone, BackerKit's revenue has tripled, and Gamefound claims to now be the #1 platform for board games. But do these claims mean that they are actually better than Kickstarter, or are they just marketing hype? If you're new here, I'm Mark from LaunchBoom, and we help tabletop game creators launch through crowdfunding. In 2024, we helped launch 111 tabletop games, raising $24.5 million, but the thing is, 96% of them were on Kickstarter. So the question of which crowdfunding platform is best for tabletop games is something that we really wanted to answer this year. This turned into a multi-month deep dive into conversations with creators, way too many spreadsheets, and compiling all of our research into 7 categories that we can use to compare the platforms to each other. And now we have the answer to this question. And by the end of this video, I think you'll be able to answer the question too, which platform will be best for your tabletop game launch? All right, let's dive in. All right, so one of the first things I made when diving in was a chart.
Of course you did.
So this looks at the total funding and crowdfunding per year on each of the platforms filtered for tabletop games. In 2024, BackerKit raised $23.1 million, Gamefound raised $84.5 million, and Kickstarter raised $216.6 million. As you can see, the amount of funding for games on Kickstarter has been decreasing year over year since 2021. Gamefound has gone up from $22 million in 2021 to $84.5 million in 2024, and BackerKit has also seen growth, but not nearly as much as Gamefound.
Super interesting. So clearly Gamefound and BackerKit are taking a bite out of Kickstarter.
Definitely, but it's actually not as big as I thought it was going to be. What's more notable to me about this chart is that tabletop game funding is just growing overall. 2021 was kind of an outlier because of COVID, so if we look just from 2022 to 2024, there's been an increase in tabletop game funding of $54 million. But the question I want to answer now is, why are creators going to Gamefound and BackerKit? And are their campaigns actually performing better? But before I dive into that, I know you want to give some context on how each of these platforms started.
Yep, I think a brief history lesson will be good so we all understand why the platforms have certain strengths and weaknesses. This is going to be rapid fire. Let's start with Kickstarter. It was started in 2009 by Perry Chen, Yancey Strickler, and Charles Adler. They wanted to allow artists to bring their ideas to life by having the community decide on which ones to fund. It didn't take long for it to expand to all types of creative ideas, like tech products, restaurants, and tabletop games. Speaking of tabletop games, that became their biggest category and still is today, making up about 28% of all funding on the platform. Kickstarter has been incredibly influential with the growing tabletop market, being responsible for games like Nemesis Lockdown from Awakened Realms, Frosthaven from Cephalofair Games, and most recently, Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere RPG from Brotherwise Games, which raised over $15 million. Now, the original founders of Kickstarter aren't part of the day-to-day anymore, and in 2022, a new CEO joined, Everett Taylor, a young and accomplished entrepreneur with an incredibly strong marketing background. Kickstarter needed a new vision and the leadership to help them accomplish it, because competition has finally shown up. Gamefound. Gamefound started in 2016 by Marcin and Simon. Marcin was CEO of Awakened Realms, the board game publisher I mentioned a moment ago that raised millions through Kickstarter. At the beginning, Gamefound actually wasn't a crowdfunding platform, but a pledge manager.
Oh, and just so everyone knows, what's a pledge manager exactly?
It's a software that helps make managing the post-crowdfunding process way easier by organizing backer information and helping with fulfillment. Marcin started Gamefound mainly because he didn't like Kickstarter's lack of post-campaign tools and wanted a better software to help them fulfill their Kickstarter campaigns. And for 4 years, they kept letting more and more tabletop creators use it, but on December 17th, 2020, they decided to evolve. They launched their first crowdfunding campaign on Gamefound for ISS Vanguard, one of Awakened Realms games, and raised $4.9 million. This officially kicked off their beta into being a crowdfunding platform. One of their biggest differentiators, like the brand name suggests, was that they focused solely on tabletop games. In 2022, they officially came out of beta and started accepting more game creators. Marcin set an ambitious goal to match Kickstarter's tabletop crowdfunding revenue by 25% in 2022. With Kickstarter bringing in more than $270 million for tabletop games in 2021, that meant his relatively new platform had to raise $67.5 million. They ended up doing $28.3 million that year, but in 2024, that number reached $84 million. Part of the reason why they didn't hit their goal as quickly as they wanted? Well, a new challenger appeared. Enter BackerKit. The founders Maxwell and Rosanna launched the first six-figure Kickstarter project called Diaspora back in 2010, and they ended up building pledge management software to help them manage their post-campaign process. In 2012, they released that software to the public as BackerKit. Just like Gamefound's origin story, BackerKit was mainly focused on helping creators from Kickstarter with their post-campaign, but unlike Gamefound, BackerKit was open to all project categories. They've been by far the most successful pledge management software ever. But in 2022, the same year Gamefound's crowdfunding came out of beta, BackerKit's crowdfunding beta launched. They had over 40 creators launch that year, but they were largely focused on big tabletop game publishers. For example, one of their first launches was from Restoration Games, a publisher that had previously launched 4 successful Kickstarters, and on BackerKit, their campaign raised over $2 million. In July of 2023, they officially came out of beta and opened up crowdfunding to all.
All right, so just to summarize all that, BackerKit and Gamefound were created out of necessity because Kickstarter didn't offer pledge management tools, and then those tools evolved into their own crowdfunding platforms, meaning they basically created their own competitors.
Yep.
Wild. Well, now's a good time to start diving into the 7 categories we'll be using to compare the platforms. I had a lot of help getting access to this tabletop data from Konstantinos, the founder of Hive, Vesuvius Media, and Tabletop Analytics, as well as Adam Clark. He's the founder of KickTrack and PledgeManager.com. So thank you to both of them for the help. Now, with that out of the way, I got a lot of data to share with you. So without further ado, let's dive into the first category, project categories. All right, so I wanted to start here because I think one of the quickest ways to figure out which platform is best for you is to look at the project categories that are performing the best on each platform. I dug up a lot of nitty-gritty data, but before we get into all of that, I think it's good to start with a high-level overview of all the categories on each platform, even those outside of games. It will make more sense why in a minute, but let's start with Kickstarter. So Kickstarter has 15 main categories and a total of 155 subcategories. Here's a look at the funds raised on Kickstarter broken down by category. Games is the largest category with 2.61 billion raised. Then it's followed by design and technology, which combined is another 3.4 billion. The top 3 categories combined make up 71% of all the funding on the platform. Now, I'm going to circle back to Kickstarter and go deeper into the data, but first, let's look at BackerKit. BackerKit has 15 main categories and no subcategories. Role-playing games, writing and publishing, and tabletop games are the top 3. But keep in mind that one campaign, Brandon Sanderson's Words of Radiance Leatherbound, makes up 94% of all the funding in the writing and publishing category. So the success of that category in particular is pretty skewed. Where BackerKit has really been standing out is in the TTRPG, plushies and toys, and enamel pin categories, where they've seen quite a lot of growth year over year. All right, let's now talk about Gamefound. Gamefound has 52 categories and no subcategories. Since Gamefound is only focused on board games, most of their categories are simply genres of board games. For example, unlike their competitors, they have categories that describe the type of game, like strategy, RPG, or solo. But more recently, Gamefound has expanded their categories a little bit more by also allowing projects that aren't games themselves, but are still part of the tabletop game ecosystem. For example, gaming tables, dice, or character sheets for D&D.
So Gamefound is the only one that focuses mainly on board games, while Kickstarter and BackerKit cater to more tabletop categories. But tabletop is pretty broad. Did you look into the subcategories like TTRPGs or board games and accessories?
Great question, and yep, I did. First, let me pull up this chart comparing the top 40 campaigns on each of the platforms. I thought looking at the top 40 campaigns first would give us more of an apples to apples comparison of what's performing the best across the platforms. So as you can see, board games and RPGs are the biggest categories by volume. If we look at RPGs first, we can see that Gamefound doesn't have any RPGs in its top 40 campaigns. So let's zoom in on Kickstarter and BackerKit first. Starting with BackerKit, even outside of the top 40 campaigns, RPGs is BackerKit's biggest category and has had the most meaningful growth since they launched, doing over 19 million in 2024. But even though RPGs only make up 22.5% of the top 40 campaigns on Kickstarter, it doesn't mean they aren't launching a lot of RPGs too. In 2024, Kickstarter launched RPGs like Brandon Sanderson's that did 15 million. And if we zoom out to all the RPGs, they raised over 62 million from 1,400 projects. So yes, Kickstarter has been more successful with RPGs from a numbers perspective, but BackerKit is making some moves here, and I wouldn't say the choice on which platform to choose is clear just by looking at the data I just shared. So you'll have to keep watching to figure out which which is best for you. Next, let's look at board games in general. In 2024, the tabletop category on BackerKit, which is basically their board game category, dropped off substantially, going from 8.2 million in funds raised in 2023 to 4 million in 2024. To me, the data shows that most creators have been choosing either Kickstarter or Gamefound when it comes to board games. So let's look at the top 40 board game campaigns in 2024 on Kickstarter and Gamefound. First off, let me pull up some aggregate metrics. For Kickstarter, the top 40 board games raised $46.6 million in total. The average funding was $1.1 million and the median funding was $973,000. I like looking at the median because it helps to weed out some of the outliers in the data, which may skew the averages up. All right, for Gamefound, the top 40 raised $65 million in total. The average funding was $1.6 million and the median funding was $829,000.
Interesting. So besides the median funding, it looks like Gamefound is outperforming Kickstarter quite a bit when looking at top 40 campaigns.
On the surface, yeah, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper. So let's look at what percentage of the total funding on each platform the top 40 campaigns make up. This will give us a good idea of how much the platforms rely on big campaigns. So on Kickstarter, that $46 million in total top 40 board game funding makes up 21.53% of their total tabletop funding, which was $216.6 million. And on Gamefound, that $65 million makes up 77.01% of all the funding, which was $84.5 million.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm understanding this. So just 40 campaigns make up 77% of all the funding on Gamefound in 2024?
That's right, but it gets even more interesting. I started noticing that the same creator names kept showing up on the top 40 list for Gamefound. Chip Theory Games launched 3 campaigns, all in the top 40, and raised $3.6 million. Archon Studio launched 3 campaigns, all in the top 40, and raised $8.1 million. Simon launched 6 campaigns total, 4 in the top 40, and raised $12.1 million. And Awakened Realms, who, as a reminder, are the owners of Gamefound, launched 5 campaigns total, with 4 campaigns in the top 40, and raised over $17 million. So just these 4 creators make up 48.5% of all the crowdfunding funds raised on the platform in 2024. Remember, on Kickstarter, even if you take the entire top 40 board game campaigns, which represent 35 separate creators, it only accounts for 21.5% of all the tabletop game funding.
So it kind of seems like Gamefound really relies on large established creators to boost their numbers up.
That's what the numbers show, and it makes sense. I mean, Gamefound has been pretty public about the strategy of going after large creators and making deals with them. Last year, they struck a deal with Simon to exclusively launch their projects on Gamefound, and in my conversations with other creators, I've heard of many more deals being offered to Kickstarter creators to move to Gamefound. Stuff like offering to lower the platform fee or even pay for ad spend. Their business strategy seems to be step 1, attract established creators to Gamefound by offering really good deals. Step 2, have those established creators boost the total funding numbers. And then step 3, use that as marketing content to attract less established creators to Gamefound. So when you see a headline from Jamie Stegmaier saying how Gamefound is the biggest crowdfunding platform for board games, you can see their marketing plan in action. It makes strategic sense because Gamefound is launching so many fewer campaigns than Kickstarter. In 2024, 300 campaigns launched on Gamefound, with 220 of them being successful, which is a 73% success rate, while Kickstarter launched 6,646, with 5,314 being successful, which is an 80% success rate. So I don't think big raises from big established companies on Gamefound are really the best guidepost in helping us answer the question, which platform is better, since those campaigns would have probably done at least equally as well on Kickstarter. I found this quote from Marcin, the CEO of Awakened Realms and Gamefound, from 2022, but I think it still applies today. I'm 100% convinced this success is due to the games and the publishers behind them. The intuitive design of the platform might help a little bit, but I'm sure that on Kickstarter they would have also been very successful. And if we dive even deeper into the data, we see that 95% of the top 40 board game campaigns on Gamefound have launched previous campaigns, and 92.5% have previously launched Kickstarter campaigns, with the average number of previous Kickstarter campaigns launched before coming to Gamefound being 13. My point is that based on this, I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of funding on Gamefound is not coming from beginners, and those established creators that launched on Gamefound would have been successful on Kickstarter too.
But what about Kickstarter? Are the top 40 campaigns a mix of newbies and veterans?
Well, 80% of the top 40 board game creators had launched previous projects, so most are not newbies. But Kickstarter having 8 first-time creators in the top 40 versus 2 on Gamefound is a pretty big difference. Plus, the top board game on Kickstarter in 2024 was the first-time creator Factory Fortress, who raised $3.3 million. Furthermore, if we compare the total funding from first-time creators in the top 40, we see that Kickstarter first-time creators raised $8.3 million, while Gamefound raised $1.2 million.
Alright, so generally speaking, Gamefound's big numbers might look enticing, but when we look a little deeper, we see they're actually boosted from those big established creators, with just 4 creators making up almost 50% of all the crowdfunding funds raised on the platform. And if we look at Kickstarter, we see 4 times more first-time creators in the top 40 than Gamefound. But I'm still curious to know if there are specific genres of board games that seem to be performing better on each of the platforms. Did you take a look into that?
Of course I did. So for each of the top 40 games, we further categorized them into 6 subcategories: heavy strategy, medium light strategy, co-op, campaign, miniatures, and cozy and cute games. Then we can do a more apple-to-apple comparison, looking at how these different subcategories performed on each platform. On Gamefound, subcategories loved by more hardcore game hobbyists seem to outperform Kickstarter in terms of total and average funds raised. For example, co-op, campaign, and miniatures. On the other hand, Kickstarter seems to cater to games with more broad appeal, and subcategories like heavy strategy, medium light strategy, and cozy and cute outperform Gamefound.
So if you're a creator and you have a game that caters to a more hardcore game hobbyist, plus you're a veteran creator, you might want to launch on Gamefound. And if you're on the outside of those categories, especially if you're not a huge established creator, Kickstarter might be the right one. But the question now becomes why? Why does subcategory or a creator's crowdfunding experience really matter when it comes to the platform? Well, that's a good segue into the next category, community and platform size. If you launch your pre-order on your own website, the only way people will find you is if you drive the traffic yourself. But if you launch on a crowdfunding platform, you can tap into their built-in communities, which will drive revenue for your launch. So figuring out how big of an impact the communities of each platforms have on the campaign is pretty important.
All right, so just so we're clear, you'll be looking at how big the community of backers is on each of the platforms and how much additional funding creators can expect from those communities.
Exactly. Let's start with Kickstarter. Any way you look at it, Kickstarter is the biggest platform, period. It has more funding, more projects, more traffic, etc. It makes sense. It's been around a lot longer than Gamefound and BackerKit, but how much bigger is it exactly? Well, the data on Kickstarter's website says that they have 23,757,512 backers. Gamefound has over 1.3 million. BackerKit, over 750,000. But is larger necessarily better? Maybe. Let's break it down. What I want to do first is try to understand how much funding for a campaign typically comes from each platform's community. I want to preface this by saying that the info I'm about to share doesn't necessarily tell the full story because I don't have access to all of the data from every launch on each platform, but I still think the data and experiences I will share offer insight. First, we're going to look at data from a couple of first-time creators on Kickstarter that we worked with at LaunchBoom. The reason why I'm choosing first-time creators is because the platform size matters the most for these types of creators, since established ones already have their own communities they can tap into for their launches. So first, let's look at Pantheon by Trevor Kurth. His launch on Kickstarter raised $288,619. And here are all the pledges that Kickstarter Analytics tracked as coming from their platform. I don't think search should be attributed to Kickstarter because if someone searched for Pantheon, they would have had to have heard about it somewhere else. So let's take that out. And now we're left with a total of $65,982, which means that 22.86% of all funding came from Kickstarter. For the second campaign, let's take a look at Sugar Pow by Fancy Melon Games. Again, a first-time creator. They raised $53,437. While lower than Pantheon, it's still a lot of money, especially for a first-time publisher. Using the same filters as before, in total, Kickstarter drove $15,370 in additional sales, or 28.76% of all the funding.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to have such a large percentage of the campaign funding to come from Kickstarter itself. But I'm curious, did you also look at an example of an established creator launching on Kickstarter?
Yep, I did. I took a look at Hit Point Press and the project we worked on called Field Guide to Floral Dragons, a TTRPG campaign which raised $1.1 million. Before launching this campaign, they had already launched 15 campaigns, so their community was already pretty big. So how much did Kickstarter drive to this campaign? $226,495, or 19.47% of their total funding. So it was a lower percentage than the 2 first-time creators that I shared, but still pretty high.
Yeah, so it seems like the discoverability on Kickstarter can be pretty amazing, even for campaigns that had previous big audiences before they launched.
That's what I'm seeing too, but next let's look at BackerKit. Now we have a lot less direct experience working with BackerKit's crowdfunding platform, but I found this Reddit thread from the creator Inkwell Ideas, who has launched 21 Kickstarter projects and has now launched 2 BackerKit projects. This thread breaks down the data from their latest campaign that raised $93,560. According to his breakdown, BackerKit Discovery brought in about 4% of all the funding, or $3,742. Then there's this other thread asking for advice on choosing between Kickstarter and BackerKit. The top commenter said this: Kickstarter if you have no audience, BackerKit if you bring the audience. That's basically the way that I've seen it play out. Kickstarter has people that browse Kickstarter just to find games and will bring you half or more of your audience up to a certain point, let's say about $25,000 for a point of reference. Over that, Kickstarter's audience has less of an effect and keeping everything pre-post campaign streamlined within BackerKit is more worth it. So it seems like it's common knowledge that Kickstarter will likely drive more traffic organically, but still, some RPG creators are choosing to launch on BackerKit and finding success. There must be something else that's driving them to BackerKit, but more on that later. Next, let's look at Gamefound. There's this pretty big thread on Reddit r/boardgames asking about Gamefound versus Kickstarter. I like the thread because people look at the two platforms from the frame of the backer and the creator. The top comment was this: "From a backer point of view, in my opinion, it's Gamefound. Their website has better UI, the integrated pledge manager is easier to use, and the pages support YouTube videos. Kickstarter player sucks." However, a project being of Kickstarter versus Gamefound is not nearly enough of a reason to back or not back a game. So from this comment, it seems like though backers appreciate certain features on Gamefound more, there's very little loyalty to the platforms themselves. Instead, they have loyalty to the publishers, and if it's a new publisher, they evaluate the game on its own, not the platform it's launching on. Another comment in this thread is from the publisher Asterisk Games, who launched Railways of Los Atlas on Kickstarter and raised $98,893. They said, "Kickstarter is far better for smaller new publishers. If you look at Gamefound and BackerKit, the only campaigns that really did well were run by established companies who brought their own fan base to the platform with them. Maybe eventually you'll see better results for small companies, but at this point, I think the choice is still Kickstarter. I think you just get a lot more people stumbling onto your project from random traffic on the site."
So it looks like the sentiment online about Gamefound and its discoverability is pretty similar to BackerKit, where it doesn't tend to be as good on Gamefound as on Kickstarter because of the limited size of the community and traffic.
Yeah, and that sentiment seems to be shared by many creators too.
Oh, another question. I've heard a lot of, well, Gamefound must be better for games because they are only focused on games. So in your research, what would be your response to that?
Good question. I actually saw this article on Polygon recently about Kickstarter with a quote from their director of communications who said, 70% of all backings to games projects in 2024 came from backers who also supported projects in other categories like design and tech, comics, and publishing. With Gamefound being specifically focused on games, they tend to attract more hardcore game hobbyists. But because Kickstarter's platform is more diverse in terms of categories, it naturally attracts more backers from various interests and industries like tech, design, art, comics, graphic novels, etc. This can be a huge opportunity for game creators, as projects on Kickstarter are often discovered by people who weren't initially looking for a game but are intrigued by the unique game concepts. If your game has crossover appeal, like strong artistic elements or a thematic twist, a narrative component, Kickstarter's diverse backer community could really boost visibility and funding for your game. For example, a game like Aspens, which raised over $500,000 with 31.46% coming from Kickstarter's community, or a game like Peaks, which raised over $198,000 with 33.2% coming from Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, and to me it makes a lot of logical sense. I mean, people who like board games also like other stuff too, so of course having other categories on a platform is going to indirectly help game creators get their campaign in front of more people. And so from all this, it seems like discoverability on Kickstarter is probably better than Gamefound and BackerKit in most cases, and can drive significant funding, especially if you are not an established creator. And then also, if you're in the RPG category, that may be changing in BackerKit's favor, or if you're in the co-op, campaign, and miniature categories on Gamefound. But in general, Kickstarter seems to be less risky for a more diverse set of game creators.
And hey, real quick, if you love spreadsheets as much as Mark, or even a little bit less, and you want to access all the data that we're referencing here on Kickstarter, Gamefound, or BackerKit, we've included a link to download it below. It's in a Google Sheet, so you can copy it, verify what we're talking about, and analyze all the data yourself. Okay, let's get back to it with Category 3, Payments and Fees. Fees and payment methods. This sounds like it's going to be a riveting topic, Mark.
No, I get it, but don't worry. There's actually some really interesting stuff in this category, I promise, and you should definitely pay attention to it. So first, let's look through the more boring but still important topics, starting with the stuff that's the same across all the platforms. So all three crowdfunding platforms have an all or nothing crowdfunding model, meaning if the creator doesn't hit their goal, then no funds are taken from the backer and given to the creator. If the campaign does fund, on all the three platforms, the backer's credit cards are charged when the campaign ends. Now, the fees they charge you, the creator, are all basically the same. Here's a table breaking it down. Each charge a 5% platform fee on any funds raised. That's how the platforms make money. Then their payment processors take 3% plus 30 cents per pledge, or 20 cents if you're Gamefound. Also on Kickstarter, if a pledge is under $10, then there's a discounted micropledge fee of 5% plus 8 cents per pledge. So in terms of payment methods, Kickstarter and BackerKit both use Stripe to process funds, so the payment methods available are the same. And Gamefound offers the same methods as Kickstarter and BackerKit, but also notably have PayPal as an option, plus these other methods you see on the screen now. All right, let's move on to more of the fun stuff, starting with Gamefound. So they have an option for payments called Stable Pledge. This is a program that every creator can join that offers backers a full refund if specific conditions are met. Here are those conditions. If the creator changes changes the price estimates, like shipping costs, for example, at any point after the campaign ends by more than 10%, backers affected will have 2 weeks to request a 100% refund. If a backer refunds, Gamefound will refund its 5% fee to the creator. Gamefound also has an option called Stretch Pay, where creators can choose to let backers break down their payments into installments. The minimum amount to trigger Stretch Pay and the number of installments is completely customizable by the creator. For example, let's say that you have a reward that is $200 and you allow Stretch Pay in 4 installments. Backers will pay the first installment of $50 during the campaign and then $50 3 more times over the next 3 months. It's important to keep in mind that Stretch Pay is not the same as typical buy now, pay later options like Klarna or Affirm, which are basically loans. With something like Affirm, the creator would get all the money up front from Affirm and the backer would pay back Affirm directly, but that's not what's happening here. Backers are breaking up their payment to the creators directly, which means that there's a strong likelihood that some percentage of backers who choose Stretch Pay won't complete the installments, which is just something to keep in mind. Still, it's a really interesting innovation that is very popular with backers. All right, next up, BackerKit. They also have a Stretch Pay option, but call it pay over time. Creators who opt in to pay over time will allow backers to break up their payments on any pledge over $150. The backer's pledge will be paid out over 4 months after the campaign. So basically the same as Gamefound, but just a little bit more restrictive.
Does Kickstarter have any fun payment stuff?
Up until recently, they actually didn't, but they just announced their own pay over time feature called Pledge Over Time. Like the other platforms, it breaks the pledge into 4 payments, but where it differs is that the additional payments will be collected every 2 weeks instead of every month.
All right, so all of the platforms basically operate the same when it comes to the fees they charge to creators, but offer some different payment methods to backers. Then they all have a pledge over time feature, and Gamefound is the only one with the stable pledge feature.
Nailed it.
Okay, that wasn't too bad actually, but my turn. Let's dive into marketing and promotion. This category is going to be specifically looking at all of the marketing and promotional opportunities offered by each of the platforms. These can further be broken down into these subcategories. 1, performance marketing. 2, featured placements, and 3, newsletters. Let's start with performance marketing. This is where the platform's marketing team will advertise your campaign and be paid when they get you a sale. Now, all 3 platforms have performance marketing services, and I'm not going to comment on the actual performance. That'd be a good thing to ask them directly. But what I can comment on is how their offer works. Kickstarter Performance supports creators during their pre-launch and live campaign phases and bill a percentage of revenue directly attributed to their advertising. Their service also includes creative asset production for live campaign ads at no cost to the creator. BackerKit has probably the most competitive offer. They cover all the ad spend and charge 15% of pledges directly attributed to their efforts, plus the amount they spend on ads during the campaign for repayment. Creators that go with BackerKit don't have to pay them back until they get the funds from their campaign. It's interesting to note here that BackerKit's performance marketing is not exclusive to those who launch on BackerKit, meaning that you can launch on Kickstarter and still apply to work with them. Now, Gamefound also has performance marketing and charges 10% of the revenue that comes from ads, but they also just announced this new feature that I want to spend some time on, AdFound. This is a tool that allows creators to run Facebook and Instagram ads from their Gamefound account. To use it, you'll upload ad imagery and copy, set an ad budget, and then ads will run from Gamefound's ad accounts. This is important to note. The ads will not be running on the creator's account. Creators can use AdFound if they have at least 500 followers on their project, but how much does it cost? Well, if a creator uses AdFound during the pre-launch to collect followers, then there's no charge. And if a creator uses it during the live campaign to collect backers, there's a 5% fee on pledges from those ads. So overall, it sounds like a really cool concept, but since there hasn't been much publicized about it yet, we'll just have to wait and see how well it works. All right, next, featured placements. These are spots throughout the website which get more visibility. For example, on Kickstarter, they have featured placement on the homepage and category menus, and they also have something called Projects We Love. This is where Kickstarter highlights certain campaigns that, like the name suggests, they love. Getting the badge not only boosts your credibility of the campaign, but also gets you better placement in the listings. So how much does it cost to get these placements? Nothing, which is good and bad depending on how you look at it. Kickstarter's team makes the call on who gets what placement, and there's no way to pay your way in. Gamefound has featured placements on their homepage and a top banner that's visible on every page. I'm not sure about the homepage placement, but the top banner seems to be something that can be paid for. There's a help article that says one of the ways to promote your campaign is by displaying an ad at the top of the Gamefound's website. Please contact us if you're interested in such advertising. And lastly, BackerKit. It looks to me that the only featured placement is on BackerKit's homepage, and I believe it's just based on popularity. The third subcategory is newsletters. All 3 platforms boast big newsletters and are very actively sending out emails with new campaigns in them. Getting featured is definitely a plus. Kickstarter, again, isn't something that you can pay for or negotiate your way into. Gamefound's can be negotiated if you sign up for their marketing services, and BackerKit is the same as Gamefound.
All right, so it seems like they all have some offering in each of the categories you just went through. What I'm really interested to see is how good AdFound ends up being. I will say that in the last 12 years of being in advertising, every automated tool I've seen for advertising has never lived up to the hype, but I'd love to be proven wrong here. Plus, I'm really curious how creators will like it that they won't be advertising through their own Facebook account when using AdFound. Another thing is that I'm guessing that because Kickstarter has more traffic and a bigger backer database, stuff like homepage placement and the newsletter may have more potential than the other platforms.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being the case.
All right, so that's another category down. So let's move on to category 5, pre-launch features. Let's now look at all the tools the platforms have to help creators before they launch. The most important feature, which they all have, is the ability to collect pre-launch followers on the platform. But how they allow you to do that and the extra features that they have to complement that core feature are all a little bit different. So let's start with Kickstarter. Kickstarter's pre-launch pages got a bit of an upgrade in 2024. It used to be very simple and all you could change was the project title and main image. Now the editor has gotten a bit more powerful. Pages can be customized a lot more and made a lot longer. The only call to action available with Kickstarter's pre-launch pages is for someone to follow your campaign. To follow the campaign, the person has to create a Kickstarter account, which is both good and bad. Starting with the bad, people that don't have Kickstarter accounts may not go through the trouble to create one if they just have a little interest in your project. The good, if they do create one or log in and follow your project, they are much more likely to follow through with their purchase. Now, Kickstarter will send out 3 notifications to your followers at preset times. One when you launch, one 48 hours before your campaign ends, and one 8 hours before your campaign ends. These notifications are not customizable, and also you cannot download your follower list. Lastly, Kickstarter pre-launch pages are discoverable on their platform, which helps to draw more interest to your project. Next up, Gamefound. Like Kickstarter, Gamefound allows you to create a pre-launch page that's also very customizable. The call to action is the same as Kickstarter to get a follower to the campaign. Like Kickstarter, people must have a Gamefound account to follow. They'll send the notifications automatically to the followers, and the follower list can't be downloaded. A feature that Gamefound has that Kickstarter doesn't is that you can add something called a follower gift, essentially an incentive for someone to follow your campaign. For example, you can offer an automatic discount or a free add-on if they follow your campaign in the pre-launch and then back your campaign when it's live. Another feature they have is commenting updates and FAQs. The pre-launch page is basically the campaign page, but in preview mode, meaning stuff like comments can be accessed before the campaign launches. This is a really cool feature because it allows followers to start chatting with the creator and other backers prior to the launch. Last up, BackerKit. They also have pre-launch pages, but they call them teaser pages. Again, they're customizable. Where they differ from Kickstarter and Gamefound is that they ask for an email opt-in or for someone to follow with their BackerKit account. I think this call to action is the best of the 3 platforms because it's the best of both worlds. Asking for an email is often a better call to action at this stage, and if people want to create an account, they can do that too. They continue to differentiate from Kickstarter and Gamefound by giving creators basically full customizability over the email notifications and the ability to download the follower list. BackerKit also has something called Launch Party, which I like to think of as a teaser page on steroids. Basically, it's a way to turn your teaser page into an event leading up to your launch. You can add a countdown timer, polls, updates, discussions, and connect your live stream directly to the page.
So in terms of pre-launch features, BackerKit seems to win here.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they have more features built in that I think the other platforms should take note of. But the question is, will they continue to offer better features when it comes to the live campaign?
Good question. Let's find out in the next category, live campaign features. Now we're putting the microscope over all the features that support your campaign being live. Here's where the list of features offered by the platform starts getting pretty big. Because I don't think anyone wants to sit through an hour-long video of me going through all of them, I'm gonna give a really high-level overview of the core features they each have and then get into some of the unique features that they offer. Let's start with comparing the most basic features that every crowdfunding platform has: campaign page editors, communication tools, and rewards and add-ons. For the campaign page editors, all 3 have fairly customizable editors that are pretty easy to use. There isn't a massive difference here. For communication tools, each platform has threaded commenting and campaign updates. Kickstarter is the only one that allows direct messaging between the backer and the creators directly on the platform. For rewards and add-ons, the core functionality is quite similar. On all platforms, you can add different rewards and add-ons. On BackerKit, only a single reward or add-on can be added to a backer's pledge. Kickstarter only allows you to add a single reward, but you can increase the quantity of add-ons in your cart. Now, Gamefound does both and operates more like a typical e-commerce website, which I like. For example, look how I can change the quantity of a reward on this campaign. This is a more typical UI that online shoppers are used to. Another difference exclusive to BackerKit and now more recently Kickstarter are secret rewards, called hidden rewards on BackerKit. This basically allows creators to share exclusive rewards with certain people. This is something that another highly popular crowdfunding site, Indiegogo, has done for a long time and is one of my favorite features about that platform, so it's really cool to see it on BackerKit and Kickstarter. Alright, now let's get into some of the core differences between the platforms. Let's start with Gamefound. Because Gamefound is only focused on games, they designed a specific user interface to call out some of the important game information that applies to pretty much every campaign. Info like number of players, playtime, age, genre have a special section at the top of the page. Stretch goals are given their own section, and the next available one displays at the top after the funding goal is reached. Lastly, creators can add different translations of their campaign page for backers to choose from. Next up is BackerKit. They have quite a lot of unique features. First up, incentives. Like the name suggests, these are optional incentives that you can add to your campaign for two different segments. First, 48-hour backers. If someone backs within 48 hours, a special incentive like an add-on will automatically be added to their pledge. Second, returning backers. You can upload your list of previous backers and give them a special incentive for backing your latest campaign. Next feature, polls. You can ask backers questions and create polls as a fun way to get information and foster engagement. Next, achievements. This is their version of stretch goals. They have a few different ways for achievements to be unlocked. There's pledge count and funding goal achievements, where something is unlocked by hitting a certain backing amount, action achievements, where something is unlocked after a certain amount of clicks happen on a CTA, manual achievements, where something is unlocked based on the creator's discretion, and social share achievements, where something is unlocked pretty much the same way as action achievements. The next feature is streaming. You can hook up your Twitch, YouTube, or Moonbeam live stream to your campaign page. Next, cross collab, a really unique feature where you collaborate with another live campaign and offer an incentive to back both campaigns. If the funding goal is reached and a backer pledges to both of them, they can unlock this exclusive cross collab reward. And lastly, overtime mode, a really fun feature where if someone backs the campaign in the last 10 minutes, the campaign will be extended for another 10 minutes and activate overtime mode. The campaign will stay live until it doesn't get a pledge for 10 minutes.
So once again, in terms of features being offered alone, it looks like BackerKit would win this round.
Definitely. They seem more willing to test out new and innovative features.
All right, well, let's see if they keep the innovation going in our last category, post-campaign features. All right, we made it to the final round. Let's go. It's time to talk about all the features the platforms offer that make the post-campaign easier. If you remember from the brief history lesson CK gave at the beginning, both BackerKit and Gamefound started as software specifically for the post-campaign. So I'll start off by saying that they have much more mature feature sets for the post-campaign than Kickstarter. But with that said, Kickstarter has started to release useful post-campaign features lately. Let's start with a feature that they all have and is incredibly important, late pledge. If you turn this on, this allows backers to continue to pledge to the campaign even after the campaign ends. Any additional pledges will be added to the total amount that you raised on your campaign. Kickstarter released this feature in 2024 and it's been very popular. Now Kickstarter creators don't have to use BackerKit or Gamefound if they want to set up a late pledge store. The next feature we'll talk about is pledge management. Kickstarter doesn't have a robust pledge manager like Gamefound and BackerKit yet, but they just announced that their own pledge manager is coming in 2025.
Yeah, that's right. You can now keep all of your backers on one platform. Now, Kickstarter's pledge management tools are here, available today for select creators and will be available to all creators very soon.
Currently, they have a feature called Surveys, which can be thought of as a stripped down pledge manager. Even though it's much less feature rich, if you have a relatively small project, say less than 100 backers, using Kickstarter's survey tool may be worth it because there's no fees to use it and it keeps everything in the same platform. But if you are looking for something more robust, BackerKit and Gamefound's pledge managers are currently much better. So now let's take a look at some of the key differences between these two pledge managers. First up, cost. Assuming your project launched on BackerKit or Gamefound, there is no upfront cost to use the pledge manager. They do charge a fee of the funds raised through the pledge manager though. For Gamefound, it's 5%, and on BackerKit, it's 3.5%. Second, taxes and VAT. Both have robust tools for helping to collect tax, but Gamefound goes a bit further. They will actually settle EU VAT for creators. There are some important details to how this works that I'm not going to go into right now, but you can check out their help article on the subject. Third, backer support. If one of your backers has a question question during the Pledge Manager, BackerKit will actually act as the first line of defense. They claim that they answer 90% of backer questions for you, and the ones they can't answer, they'll forward to you. Gamefound doesn't currently offer this. Fourth, pre-order stores. Both platforms have pre-order stores, which are pretty similar functionality-wise to Late Pledge, but the UI changes a little bit and it looks more like a store, especially in the case of BackerKit. There are quite a lot of other features that each of them have, but I will say in researching this video, BackerKit does have more extensive features and documentation on those features, making it a little bit easier to learn. So clearly BackerKit and Gamefound are currently way better than Kickstarter when it comes to post-campaign features, but is that reason enough for a creator to choose one of those platforms over Kickstarter? I don't think so. Even if you launch on Kickstarter, you can still use BackerKit or Gamefound for your Pledge Manager, so you aren't really missing out on those features if you choose to launch there. Plus, like I said before, Kickstarter will be launching their own Pledge Manager soon, so by the time you're watching this video, it may already be live.
We made it!
Yeah, I know. That was a lot of information and some people's heads might be spinning right now.
How about we summarize everything into like a pros and cons list?
I think that's a good idea. Why don't we start with Kickstarter? Pros, has a wide range of categories that perform well. First-time creators tend to perform better here. Has a very large and diverse backer community. Cons, the biggest thing is that it's just behind when it comes to features. The lack of a Pledge Manager is probably the thing that's hurting them the most currently.
Next, Gamefound. Pros, preferred by a more hardcore game hobbyist, so genres that appeal to this audience tend to have an edge over Kickstarter. Their focus on games allows them to focus on building features specifically for gamers' needs, both backers and creators. And they have robust features across pre-launch, the live campaign, and the post-campaign. Cons, their audience is smaller and less diverse than Kickstarter. First-time creators don't perform as well here.
Lastly, BackerKit. Pros, RPGs are performing very well here, very innovative and robust in terms of features across pre-launch, live campaign, and post-campaign. They have the best Pledge Manager. Cons, too many categories being offered, with many of them having very little volume. Board game performance has dropped off substantially. First-time creators don't seem to perform as well here either.
So in spite of Kickstarter being behind the other two platforms in terms of features, it looks like it may be a better and less risky option for most creators in most categories, both beginners and veterans alike.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the community and brand that Kickstarter has built since 2009 is incredibly powerful. But with that said, Gamefound and BackerKit are still excellent platforms, and the increased competition has only lit a fire under Kickstarter's butt, which definitely benefits the whole space. I mean, trying to truly disrupt an incumbent as large as Kickstarter is incredibly difficult, which is why I respect what both Gamefound and BackerKit are doing. But what do you think after watching this video? Which platform do you think is best for you and why? Drop a comment below and let us know. Lastly, if you want any extra help choosing the right platform for your game, we're here to help. There's a link in the description to contact my team. We can jump on a call and figure out the best platform for you.
All right, want to keep learning about how to launch your games project? YouTube thinks that you'll like this video right here. So click on it, give it a watch, and we'll see you over there.